Yeah, I never had a career plan. I don't really believe in career plans. But it must never be about you. As the leader, BRS or anything else, all you are is a conduit for the brand. So you've got to make landmark decisions that change the way you filter to get to diversity. You've got audit and the accounting profession are synonymous with trust, and there is a huge trust gap in society. So one thing that's certain is the world is changing so fast now that if you just stood still, you'll be irrelevant in 2 years from now. It's about the only thing that kind of keeps you awake at night as a leader of anyone, any organisation is.
Kevin, thanks very much for being on the Leadership Unplugged podcast. Very happy to have you. We'll get straight into it. So we tend to ask our guests an initial question which helps build the context around who you are. So I guess tell us a little bit about your early life and upbringing and kind of what that entailed.
So I was born in Walthamstow. I grew up in Chinkford in East London. I got an older brother and a younger sister. Basically, I ended up actually deciding to be an accountant quite young. I'll come back to that story through various circumstances. As I say, I didn't do particularly well at school, got into university, and probably did well enough at university to get my job here. But I only came here for 3 years to get a certificate, and then I was going to go and get a proper job. But I've enjoyed it so much, I've stayed.
You might be the first person I've ever met who wanted to be an accountant as a child. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, it's a strange one. It was the 1970s, and I was round a friend's house, and her father was in the garden. It was during the summer holidays. I remember it like yesterday. And I remember, if you like, in those days, fathers, it's a different world. Fathers weren't at home during the day. It just didn't happen. This is, let's say, 1970s. And I remember saying, "Oh, why's your dad here?" And she said, "We just lost his job." And I'd never really come across anyone that happened to. And they had a really young family, had a baby. I mean, my friend was about 16, but, she was the oldest. And I remember going home and saying to my dad, "Could you lose your job?" And he said, "Yeah, anyone can lose their job. That happens all the time." He said, "But I've got a certificate because I became an accountant through evening classes as a kid. And that means it'll be easier for me to get another job." And I remember thinking, well, I wouldn't ever want to be in that position like Vic, with a young family, obviously they had a tough time. And therefore I thought, well, I've got to get a certificate. So that was actually kind of, if you like, my entire business strategy at the age of about 16. And that's kind of why I ended up kind of doing a degree and then kind of applying to come here.
That's really interesting. You had an interesting choice of degree as well, as industrial economics.
Yeah, again, it was a bit random. I was quite ill when I was doing my A-levels. I ended up getting glandular fever, so I didn't actually visit any universities because I wasn't allowed to do very much. And they wanted me to move back a year and redo my A-levels, but I didn't want to do that because I wanted to stay with my friends. So it meant that I actually went to Nottingham when I got to Nottingham for the very first time on the very first day. I mean, not seeing a university at all. I look back on it now for my children when we spent hours travelling around the country looking at universities and thinking, different world. But anyway, they don't know they're born. But I chose industrial economics because I wasn't actually particularly great at maths, and so I thought I won't be able to do economics. Economics is probably too much maths. And industrial economics sounded close enough to management that caused me to kind of choose it. So it was like a chosen by default, if you like. But interestingly, I mean, the degree is still going. Actually, my oldest son, is doing that degree at the moment at Nottingham because I recommended it, funny enough. And again, it is now seen as more of a business degree. When I did it, it was more seen as a social sciences degree, as a kind of more business version of economics. But it's obviously evolved into that. And interesting, when I came to what was then Pricewaterhouse at the time, I found out that there were about 6 partners in my old world of insolvency that had come through that same degree, which is kind of bizarre. I mean, really fluky. I didn't know that at the time. But so it showed it kind of fitted, I think, with a lot of the kind of intro to business. So there's a lot more people doing business degrees nowadays than they were in 1980s when I did mine. And that obviously was kind of a forerunner of the business degree.
So I guess you were studying in Nottingham, you're doing your industrial economics degree, and it comes round to applying for jobs, and you kind of knew you wanted to be an accountant, as you mentioned earlier. Why PwC out of everyone that you maybe applied for?
Look, I applied to all of them actually, or as we did at the time. A couple of them didn't want me, and a couple of them didn't give me an interview. But I must admit, I'd heard of, it was then Big Eight, and of those, I probably had heard more about Pricewaterhouse than the others. So I did know, I kind of knew that it had a big standing.
Yeah.
It was nothing like the size it is now, but so I did know of it. And I think once I got offered a job by them, I kind of stopped. I was offered jobs by some smaller firms and some other firms, but once I got the job offer from Pricewaterhouse, it was at the time, I thought, right, that's the one I want.
Yeah.
And I really liked the guy that interviewed me. So I was interviewed by a guy I still know who comes to Retired Partners lunches. And he had an amazing memory for names and so on.
Yeah.
And he interviewed me completely differently to anyone else in any other firm. Okay. It was more of a conversation. He asked me more interesting questions. And at the time, I remember thinking, I'd like to work in an organisation where people are like him. Mm-hmm. And people that interview for jobs are actually your front of house, because they were a talent factory and a magnet for talent. And that guy made a big difference.
That's interesting.
His name was Keith Bell, just for the record.
Okay, nice. Well, thank you to Keith for...
Thank you. That's what I think. I said the same to him, I think. Thanks for my job.
So I guess, me and Mo joined 5 years ago, and I think the first day always seems like it was yesterday, but at the same time it feels so far away as well. I wanted to ask you, what do you remember from your first day at the firm?
Yeah, it's interesting because I get the chance in this role, and one of the highlights of my year actually, to welcome at least one of the cohorts every year of the first day students. So I often reflect on that when I'm talking to them, because I'm the first person they see.
Yeah.
And we were a small cohort of about 20. Mm-hmm. I always say to people when they're first day at work, if you look around your table group now, there will be people on your table that will either be your future spouse, best man, chief bridesmaid, or certainly friend for life. Mm-hmm. And the number of people that stop me in the lift and say, "You were right, that happened to me. I married this person, or that person became my groomsman or bridesmaid or whatever." And that was the same for me. So of the people that I joined with, I'm still in touch with 3 of the people, and there's only 20 in the room. Mm-hmm. So, and that's kind of, nearly 40 years ago. So, and one of them was godfather to 3 of my boys. So it's kind of remarkable how, at that moment of starting work, I think everyone's minds are open to new beginnings. And that's why relationships form so early. And it is actually a natural phenomenon. But for an organisation like ours, which brings together such a diverse group of people from diverse backgrounds, I think it's that's the exciting moment that really the magic happens, and people do create those friendships that last a lifetime.
And I want to follow up on that a bit. Were you always someone that was quite good with people and kind of introducing yourself and building those early relationships, or were you a bit introverted to start off with and it kind of developed as your career developed as well?
I don't think I was probably ever technically an introvert, but and I think I was always interested in people. Yeah. I wouldn't say I was an extrovert. So I think I kind of found it relatively easy to make friends. Yeah. And I was naturally interested in people, and I suppose that skill kind of grows as you grow with it. Yeah, that makes sense.
I actually remember you telling us that.
There you go, evidence.
I think it's the piece of advice which is reiterated quite a few times by many different leaders spoke to in those early years. And in terms of how to go about it, do you have a system? Do you have a way that you actually approach your network building and maintaining that network over time, or is it quite natural?
No, nothing's ever really natural in any of the jobs. I think you've always got to think about it. I'd say probably, and I've learned most of it by watching what I consider to be the very best in my career. So I always talk, it's boring everyone rigid about coming back into the office, but you learn more by observing the very best and then taking the best things from what they do and applying it yourself. So, I mean, two or three things I'd say is that one is that it's important to treat everyone the same. So a friend of mine who I worked with for many years used to say, I'm as friendly and interested in the man taking me up in the lift as the CEO I meet when I get out of the lift. Mm-hmm. Because you never know what happens next. And I know full well that a number of people come in to see me in my office who might run a big company or be in a really major role in the public sector or government or whatever. And they'll come into my office, and my secretary will often talk about them afterwards, saying, you know, they're a really nice person, they're really interesting, or they completely ignored me. And it definitely impacts you in terms of how you view that person. So there's actually a business need, as well as, if you like, being your authentic self, in being as friendly to everybody you meet, and not just saving up your best for the most important person, which I think is wrong. The second thing is that in life you go to loads of events where you don't know anyone.
Yeah.
And you're always very self-conscious, however confident you are. Certainly, I'm always very self-conscious. Gosh, I don't know anyone here. Who should I speak to? And you're conscious you're standing there, particularly at an event, with no one to talk to because you don't know anyone, that everyone must be looking at you. It takes you a while of doing numerous of those events. In my lifetime, I've done hundreds of them. That actually no one's looking at you, and everyone's feeling exactly the same. And you know, you just go and talk to people and introduce yourself, and everyone's just as interested. But when you're first going to it, so again, it's important, I think, both to be your authentic self and speak to everyone the same, and secondly, being around other people that you can learn from, watching what they do, and actually asking them is really important. And I think the third thing is that unless you go to those events, you'll never learn. So putting yourself out there and saying yes to things and going to events as early as possible teaches you that feeling of, if you like, being comfortable in your own skin in an alien environment.
That's a really good point, especially the point around asking questions and not necessarily feeling that it's okay to fail. That's kind of that mantra there. I want to kind of touch back on kind of your career path, and you've done your degree now at PwC. You've entered audit. What are some of the skills that you learned as an auditor, which you think you still kind of use to this day?
Yeah, I think it's the detail, the attention to detail, the reviewing your work, someone else reviewing your work, the layers of review, and the honing of how you do the job even better every year.
Yeah.
And again, nearly everything you do as an auditor, particularly in the younger days, you're learning from others around you. You're surrounded by different layers of people. You don't get all the advice from the one person you report to, your audit senior. You see the partners, you see all the people on the job. So you've got effectively the whole pyramid of an audit in that audit room.
Yeah.
And you're hearing how they all talk to each other, how they behave towards the client. So it was a fantastic learning space for both actually what we're doing, how a company works, where the risks are in a company, whether the way the company are explaining their results, are they true and fair? The kind of, if you like, the real science behind it. But then also how teams work, and how teams are led, and how people are inspired and getting the best from each other by how they treat each other.
Now, what you described there seems to be quite kind of universal skill set that you developed in those early years. Looking back at that time and the role that accountants played in the world of business, do you think that's evolved?
Yeah, I think it has. I think if you look at a business like ours, I mean, the growth is quite remarkable. I mean, our business, the UK and Middle East Alliance, was virtually doubled in size in the 8 years that I've been running it because of the demand for the skills that we have. Probably if you go back 40 years, it was seen probably as a more narrow skill. Yes, it was a respected skill as it is today and a valued skill, but it's probably seen more narrow. Now, with non-financial reporting, with the whole trust agenda, audit and the accounting profession are synonymous with trust, and there is a huge trust gap in society. So therefore, that skill and integrity that comes with the brand accountant and auditor, I think is now more relevant, in fact, more important for business and society.
That makes sense, and it sounds like there's a growing demand for these skills, but at the same time, there seems to be somewhat a shortage or upcoming shortage in people entering the profession. Do you think that's a challenge?
There is, but again, if you look again at our business, the number of people that applied to join us has probably increased from about 100,000 5 years ago to 400,000 last year. So we're still in demand, but you have to work at it. I mean, you've got no right for talent to want to come here. So our reach out, our work experience, our focus on social mobility, our focus on more challenged schools, what we've done with Bradford, what we've done with Belfast, what we've done with Cardiff, being in 18 regional offices, that's all part of effectively the whole effort to ensure that our gate is wide open. Our bar is high, but our gate is wide open to bring in talent, and because we need them.
That's interesting you mentioned that point. I think genuinely from the moment I learned about PwC to throughout my 5 years of my career here, I genuinely believe that this is a place which is really kind of in a league of its own in terms of the diversity inclusion agenda, in terms of bringing in diverse talent. What do you think? A lot of businesses recognize this need and are trying to do the same. What do you think sets us apart, or what do you think has enabled our success?
I think we've been on the journey for a long while. So I think some other organisations are earlier in the journey. It was probably more than 10 years ago, or certainly a long time ago, that we got rid of UCAS points as a filter. UCAS points, by their very nature, weren't going to encourage diversity because they would favour independent schools and they would favour South East. More recently, we got rid of the 2-1. So you've got to make landmark decisions that change the way you filter to get to diversity. We've now launched alongside the Flying Start that originally started 25 years ago in Newcastle, then moved out into 4 or 5 other universities, and now is in many universities, including Queen Mary's. Again, you've got to create different pathways for different people to have the opportunity to come into the organisation. Not everyone's going to come in through an apprenticeship or being a school leaver or being a graduate. You've got to have different pathways. So that's another factor. But the overriding kind of umbrella important point is that there's got to be a business reason for doing it. You're not doing it because it's a societal good or the right thing to do. Because if you do that, it becomes an initiative, and that will die in 2 or 3 years because there'll be a new initiative along. What you've got to stand back and say is, why are we doing it? We're doing it because 60% of our clients are entrepreneurs, startups, regional businesses, family-owned businesses. And they are going to choose the firm because we're very good, because we've got a fantastic brand. But when it comes down to it, it will come down to the personal relationship of the person sat in front of them, asking them to sign effectively their contract letter. And people choose them because they sound like them, they've got the same values, they come from the same backgrounds. So if you're not a diverse and inclusive employer, then you will not be relevant to 60% of the market that we serve. So the business critical reason is the main reason for diversity and inclusion. Yes, it's good for society, yes, it's good for us as a business, but unless you have a business, if you like, a line of sight to business success, then it's easy to drop it for another initiative 1 year on. We've been on this journey a long time. That's why we're successful at it.
Makes sense.
And I'm just thinking about, like, leading on from the social mobility point a bit, looking at social mobility within our leaders, how do you kind of, because we were doing it quite well at the entry level when it comes to graduate school leavers, etc. I think as you become more senior, the diversity kind of drops to a certain extent. It's getting a bit better now. Kind of what initiatives have been put in place? And what
I think, again, you choose the leaders by the talent available to choose. You've got to choose the leaders on merit, because otherwise you're a meritocracy. And so therefore you've got to make sure you're feeding through a diverse talent. So you've got the talent to choose from that are diverse. So if I look at my board, I've got a very diverse board. That's not because I made a decision to have a diverse board. It's because the talent were diverse that I had to choose from because of the effort that had been put on in previous leadership to keep talent in the organisation that were diverse. So again, we look at flow rates in promotions. We look at how we allocate jobs, because by allocating jobs, you give people the opportunities. By giving the opportunities, they get a chance to be promoted. They add to the flow rates. So you've got to look at it in the whole. And whether it was Laura leading as people leader or Ian Elliott, we've been on this journey, or even going back to Gaynor Bagley, we've been on this journey for a long while. And it's about lots of different small actions that support the overall action of being a diverse and inclusive employer, where people can bring the best of themselves to work every day and have the opportunity to progress.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just flicking forward a little bit into your career, after qualifying, you decided to move into the insolvency and restructuring practice. What was behind that move?
Yeah, and initially, actually, I went on secondment to the training department and did some lecturing, just to do something different. And I enjoyed audit, but I just thought I want to do something different. And as I go back to my original story, as I said earlier, I was probably still intending to leave. Although I liked it here, I thought, and you know what it's like at that age, you're 24, 25, you're thinking about, what next? And all your mates in the pub seem to have a more exciting job than you. I don't know, that's what it seems like, anyway. And therefore, you're kind of thinking, what next? And you want to have something interesting. So that's why I went into what was then the Union Street Training Department, which was great fun. I did it for 6 months. And then when I came out of that, and when I was in there, I came across different people doing different things. And I realized, probably more than I'd noticed before, the diversity of opportunity within the umbrella of this huge organization. And I came across some people doing insolvency, and they're actually, selling cars and assets of companies that had gone bust. And that sounded really interesting. And I kind of thought, well, if I'm going to go into a business job next, a corporate of some sort, it'd be quite useful to get that experience alongside my audit experience, alongside my training department experience. So I went there effectively to kind of increase my CV, ready to leave. But a bit like I think a lot of people would say in this organization, it's the people that keep you and the culture. And so that's kind of why I stayed. The other big factor for me was I was lucky enough to go on 2 secondments to 2 different banks, a UK clearing bank and an overseas international bank. And up until then, I assumed all organizations were the same in terms of how they treat you, in terms of how they share knowledge, and in terms of really how they upskill you. And I found in those other banks, not that they weren't good places to work, but there was far more of a kind of dead man's shoes logic to everything. There was far more of a, don't want to help him because I want to make sure I get that job next. So peer groups really competed. I was always the one that was outsider to that because, of course, I wasn't going to go for that job because I was only the secondee. So in both cases, I realized that there was something really special about the spirit within PwC of both camaraderie and sharing knowledge. And at the end of the day, that's what gets me up in the morning. That's what brings me to work. And I did enjoy it, but I was quite pleased in both those secondments that they were short-term, they weren't career decisions. So I think once I came back after the second one of those, I was quite sure I was going to stay, and it had to be something pretty special to take me away from PwC.
So we've had quite a few leaders on the podcast. This is maybe our 11th leader, I think. And something that's quite consistent across all the conversations we have is this idea of mentorship. And especially kind of looking back at that time when you were 24, 25, that could be an ideal age maybe to have found a mentor, or even later on in your career. How did you go about finding a mentor if you do have one, and how do you kind of approach that relationship?
Yeah, I never had a career plan. I don't really believe in career plans, because I think you'll only be disappointed because life isn't linear. And I kind of approached mentorships kind of in the same way. I suppose I look back now and I say to people, yes, it's a good idea to have a mentor.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I worked with people that I thought were really good and I really admired. And they were my go-to people when I was wondering about different career decisions, different jobs, different learnings, when to do whatever. So they were kind of mates in the office that happened to be 7 years older than me. Okay. One was a senior manager from Birmingham. That was Ian Powell. He ended up as a senior partner. Okay. And the other one was a senior manager from Chingford, who I used to get the train with. Uh-huh. That was Tony Lomas, who ended up as an insolvency lead on Lehman's, biggest insolvency in history. So I kind of chose my mentors pretty well, but I don't think we called them mentors. I think we just called them mates in the office or mates on the train.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Fair enough. Got a bit of a boring question for you. But in terms of your early career and you're trying to learn how to do your job, you're gaining all of these different skills. Looking at the execution of work, and what do you think are the key factors which underpin a successful execution of work, and what do our clients really value from us in an organization which delivers such diverse services?
Yeah. when I went on one of my secondments, it was to NatWest, the clearing bank in the UK, and I worked in a department that gave out probably, all the kind of insolvency and review work. So they were probably our major client at the time. The world's changed since then, but in those days they were. And that was a unique experience because I actually stood on the other side of the fence, looking in on someone else, i.e. the suppliers to them. And I kind of saw what was good. And I got a very good insight. I was only I suppose the equivalent of assistant manager then. And I got a very good insight into why one supplier was better than another, why one partner came across better in terms of either how they wrote, how they were succinct, how they interacted, and how they provided advice. And I shared that with a lot of the teams I came back, but personally, I always remembered that. I always remembered, again, I can remember seeing one very senior partner from one of our competitors being very friendly to us as quite junior people, then when our boss was in the room, ignoring us because he didn't want to be seen to be talking to us because he wanted to be seen as being a boss. And that offended all my colleagues quite rightly. And so again, how you treat everyone. And of course, the person that gives you the job, probably my overriding memory coming back was that the person that gives you the job, which was the most senior person in that organization, whose name was Bernard Bradford, actually had very little to do with the decision for you to get the job. So we as an organization thought Bernard gave us that job. And so did KPMG, and so did Deloitte, and so did Ernst & Young. The reality is that PwC or Ernst & Young was on that file weeks before Bernard Bradford signed out that job. And that decision was made by someone far more junior in the organization for different reasons. And again, so I think when you're on the outside looking in, you assume that Bernard Bradford picked up the phone and said, Tony Lomas, Ian Powell, Kevin Ellis, I'm giving you this job. The reality is he was reading that name off a file that someone else put on there. So again, how you deal with everybody else in the organization, as well as Bernard Bradford, is equally important, both in terms of being authentic and being a decent human being, but also in terms of a business need.
That makes sense. Now, trying to transition into your kind of leadership journey. So we started kind of a strong career, you built a strong skill set now, and you moved up into the partnership and started to take on more responsibility within the business. Now, professional services firms are somewhat unique in the fact that the leadership tend to come from the core business itself, rather than, for example, an industrial conglomerate where you have those actually doing the day-to-day business in a managerial class. What do you think are the benefits and challenges of that, and how did you grow into that kind of leadership, into those leadership roles?
I think you don't really realise you're growing into leadership roles. Again, if you haven't got a career plan, I didn't plan to be a leader. I was quite happy doing client work. So if you like, I probably until I was 40, I never wanted to do a leader role. I just really spent most of my time doing client work, because doing the client work, you're leading a team and you're interacting with the clients. I got the opportunity, because I was well supported and well led by the business I was in, to do different things. So I ended up branching out to do some work in the pension sector. I ended up branching out to do some work in the health sector. So I had the opportunity to kind of, if you like, make my life more interesting and explore and be brave in diving into different areas. And I think that's even more important now for our business. The chances of you as a partner doing the same thing that you became a partner doing 5 years from now is very limited, because the world's changing. Whether it's AI or cloud or whatever, it's going to change the world. So you become a partner or you get promoted because of the skill set you have. Then how you apply that skill set is what matters, and how you develop. And that was the same for me. So I had the opportunity to do other things. They seemed quite daring and quite brave, because there wasn't any revenue at the time in those industries or those businesses, and we kind of built it and we made up as we went along a little bit. I can say that. But we did, and because we had a great brand and we had great people around us, and you could go and find some experts that could help you in the health sector. You could find some actuaries that could help you in the pension sector, because the firm is awash with this talent, and you just put them alongside you and off you went. And then I think when I got asked to do a leadership role, it was just like, if you like, expanding from doing a team leading role.
Yeah.
But I never looked to be a leader. I didn't really want to do a management role. I quite liked the client work. And then I was kind of lucky enough to be asked to lead BRS, and then I went on the board 2 years later.
Just touching on your BRS leadership role, what does that role actually entail?
I think it's like any other business unit role. You know, you're responsible for a budget. You're responsible effectively for the partner group in terms of developing them and then effectively bringing people in and getting the team size right. And then you're responsible for being the kind of, if you like, helping ensure that you are the best route to market for your partners. So you're kind of coaching them and mentoring to the extent you can, but it must never be about you. As the leader, BRS or anything else, all you are is a conduit for the brand. You know, I'm the leader of PwC. You could say, my job is to make PwC the best thing it can be and be as successful as it can be. But it's not about Kevin Ellis. I mean, I just happen to be here at the moment. Someone else will be here, you know. So all I'm is a conduit. I mean, I always see the leader role is leader as servant. Our job is to serve the brand, the business for the future. And that's the amazing thing about this firm. This firm is 175 years old. It's all about legacy. And my job is to basically enhance and oil the wheels of that legacy so the firm's even more successful after I've gone. And that's the same for any leadership role.
I mean, you kind of touched on it already in that answer, and we'll definitely touch on the legacy point as well a little bit later. But I wanted to ask you to kind of describe your role to someone that's maybe a 15-year-old or like a 12-year-old, because I think we all kind of understand what your role is in the firm, but like if someone that doesn't have an advanced understanding of business or finance.
Yeah, my children often ask me that. I think they say you seem to do a lot of meetings. At the end of the day, you're effectively the steward of the brand, and therefore a lot of your decision making is about the only thing that kind of keeps you awake at night as a leader of anyone, any organisation, is brand damage that you can't manage and it's outside your control. So at the end of the day, you're the stewardship of the brand. So that means in terms of hiring the right people, promoting the right people, creating the right culture, and having the right governance to oversee that.
Yeah.
You can't do any of those things unless you're successful, because you've got to be able to pay your people, you've got to be able to invest in technology, you've got to be able to reward your partners. So at the end of the day, you need to have the right brand, the right culture, and a successful business. And that means you're constantly making sure that you're making enough money to reward those groups, invest in the technology, and invest in the next technology as well. Because one thing that's certain is the world is changing so fast now that if you just stood still, you'd be irrelevant in 2 years from now. I remember someone recently saying to me, it's no longer about FOMO, the fear of missing out. It's about FOBO, the fear of being obsolete. And I think that's so true in our world. So again, unless, 10 years ago, you didn't really need to invest more than kind of a year ahead. Now you've got to look 5 years ahead.
Yeah.
The investments in Harvey, the investments in OpenAI, the investments in Microsoft, the investments in training and upskilling people, chat PwC and the like. Yeah. All of that is not just about today, it's about 5 years from now.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, John.
I want to just touch on one point there. You mentioned culture. Now, being at the very top of highest level of the firm, and how is culture kind of synthesized, communicated, and instilled into the business?
Well, personally, stand back. Right, as in any business, the only long-term competitive advantage is its culture. You can have a great, widget or discovery, but it will at some stage or other be kind of replicated by competitors. So the only long-term competitive advantage is the culture, and that's really important. So I think, culture is something that's very fragile, and that as a leader, everything you do is to enhance and protect that culture. So it goes to who you appoint, it goes to how you speak and how you communicate, and you have to kind of check in on it in many different ways. So, for example, the You Matter survey, the fact that we score in the high 70s, and we used to score in the low 70s, and any score in the 70s is a really high score in the kind of the culture of the UK, but high 70s is really good, and we got to 80 during COVID. If you then if I look at my town halls, when I do a town hall every 3 months, often I'll answer the questions in the room, and there'll be questions online. It's always useful to read those question banks afterwards and see where people are, what's on their minds, and then you can try and address that. But again, that's always about checking in the culture. If people are willing to take part in surveys like You Matter, over 75% do. If people are willing to talk about their social background, their ethnic background in surveys, again, then they feel more comfortable in the environment. That's a positive message and tick for how we're addressing culture. So all of those things really matter. Culture is really hard to kind of, really test. But as a leader, you're constantly checking in on it through conversations in the lift, in the corridors, but also through surveys like You Matter or through question banks coming through on the town halls.
How would you define the culture that you think is a target, is the objective?
I think it's got to be supportive, economically successful, but at the same time respectful and caring. So sometimes you might not, people might have to leave the organisation. We're running a business, but dealing with people with respect and caring for them is really important. And being honest and authentic in answering questions. And, we spoke to the press about when we had to have targeted voluntary severance. That wasn't ideal, but it's easier, I think, and fairer and more transparent in this world to own the story and answer the questions publicly than to try and hide. You can't only choose to communicate when it's good news.
I wanted to ask a question about young people, because we're kind of entering into a world where a lot of young people will have what we call portfolio careers, and they kind of move around, try and build different skill sets. What's your view on that? And do you think that's a good idea? Do you think there's drawbacks to having that non-traditional career pathway? Or?
People have got to choose the right careers for them, what suits them. I think as a business, I'd hope that we have enough opportunity for the really talented people to be able to move around within our organisation rather than have to leave our organisation to get different experience. We have such diverse opportunities that I'm disappointed if talent leaves us. At the same time, I'm realistic that a number of people will. At the same time, we've got 70,000 alumni out there in the wider world, and I speak to them regularly. In fact, I was talking to a senior FD of one of the biggest companies in the UK, who's an alumni of the firm just now before I came on this podcast, and he talked about the firm in such warm, glowing terms. So again, you want people that have come through the firm and decide to go and pursue portfolio career or a different career elsewhere to have a positive view of the firm.
Yeah.
Because that can only enhance our economic success and only be good for us getting future talent, because talent often asks people that have been here, what was it like to be at PwC?
Yeah.
And if they're positive, the talent comes in through the door.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, just switching maybe to slightly more high-level thinking. Now, you joined the firm in the 80s, and looking back to that time and how things have moved since then, how do you think the way business is conducted has changed, and the role that business plays in wider society has changed during that time?
Yeah, I think it's been a bit of a roller coaster for business. So if you just take somewhere like the UK, I think for the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a lot of times where effectively the public sector connection with business has been lost in the narrative of wider society. You can't have a vibrant, supportive public sector, health service, unemployment benefit, police, army, housing, without a vibrant private sector. And sometimes that gets lost when people talk negatively about business. And if a business gets one thing wrong, and that's a bad business decision or a bad business behaviour, ethical or otherwise, then everyone talks about all of business being wrong. At the end of the day, there are no taxes, there are no jobs, there is no aspiration or opportunity in this country without private business. So that message gets lost, and it's those taxes to pay for the public services. So I think that is a big change. I think back in the 80s, I think that was acknowledged, but I think we've gone through a period where it's been lost, that story. I think the present opposition and government are talking very positively about business again, and that hasn't happened for a while, which I think is a good thing. But I think the other factor on business is that the most trusted cohort in society, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer that gets published every year, is employees in their employers. That's really interesting. It's the only cohort that's been rising consistently over the last 5 years. And I think what lies behind that is that maybe in a social media driven world, in a less trusting world, people are desperate to find something that they can hold on to and trust. And the person that pays their family's wages every month and looked after them through COVID, it definitely shot up during COVID, has certainly been a source of trust. At the same time, what I can say as a leader is the expectations of those employees for you to talk about things that matter to them has increased too. So whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's the invasion of Ukraine, whether it's what's going on in the Middle East, there has definitely been an expectation you'll talk on those things. That probably didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. I'm not saying that's wrong or right, it's just different. At the same time, I think the expectations of society, of organizations, business, charity sector, government, has also increased. And again, maybe that's a transparency of social media, and the expectations of those that lead them has increased. So we've seen, high-profile failures of leaders in the eyes of the world and in the eyes of the shareholders or the governments that probably a few years ago wouldn't have been known about as well. So there's more transparency, there's more expectation, there's a higher bar for leaders and organizations. At the same time, I think there's a huge amount more trust in organizations by their employees. And again, I think that puts more strain on organizations in terms of how they communicate, how transparent they are, how authentic they are. But at the same time, the advantage when you get it right is you get an engaged workforce delivering successfully to make a business far more successful than its competitors.
And in terms of kind of some of these crises, especially Brexit and COVID, which were kind of disrupting business in quite a significant sense, what are some of the key principles upon reflection which you've learned as a leader, looking back at those times, and you think that was something that's worth taking note of?
All businesses have got to be agile. Life isn't linear, and the events that have happened, be they COVID, Brexit, or other things, there's no playbook.
Yeah.
So the success for business is its ability to be agile, both as leaders, but also throughout the whole business. You can only get a business to be agile if you're transparent and authentic in terms of how you communicate. So the important thing in terms of saying early what you're doing and why you're doing it, whether it's good or bad, when you're supporting people through COVID, when you're saying their jobs are safe, all of that is really important, because if you say nothing, uncertainty and fear fills the vacuum. So it's really important that as a leader, even if you don't know the answer, you're better off saying I don't know the answer than saying nothing. Yeah. Because people will assume you do know the answer, you're just not telling them. So I think that is a big change and a really big factor that has changed in the last few years, and has put a bigger strain on leading. But at the same time, when you get it right, you get bigger payback.
It's interesting. Touching on some of the themes we discussed there in terms of role of business in society, part of your role as chairman is to engage with public bodies, both national and international. I'll take Davos as a specific example out of personal interest. In forums like these, what is your role and what are you trying to get out of it? What's your objective there?
I was just chatting to someone about that earlier. The Davos is really interesting. If you don't go, only if you go to Davos, do you know what Davos is? Davos is probably the most weird place you can ever go in, because basically, you live in a hotel. I live in the hotel right at the top of a hill, and at the bottom is this big hotel called the Belvedere, and the Belvedere is one of the big function centres. So we've got a lounge in there called the Thought Cafe. PwC have, and people come there for meetings. There's lots of other meetings taking place, and there's lots of lectures taking place and other events taking place, and evening events as well. There's another big centre, which is about half a mile away, a quarter of a mile away, and that's the conference centre, where again loads of events happen. And so basically, and then there's a high road, which was shops, because it's a ski resort, Davos, and the shops all get taken over by Salesforce, by different organisations. Manchester United had a shop last year, and literally their shop front is just their office, and you come in for meetings there. Yeah, so if you go into these big centres, it's airport control security. To get into Davos, it's really tight security, because you've got heads of state, you've got CEOs, And of course, the world is a dangerous place. So there's a blackout ban on planes flying over it when it's going on. So the security is incredibly tight. So firstly, it's quite a hard journey to get into Davos. And if you arrive in the rush hour when it's snowing, as I have done before, it can take you hours, and it's not very pleasant. But once you're inside, you're in this kind of slightly closeted area. But then to go in and out of buildings, you're constantly taking scarves, hats, shoes off to go through airport security. It takes ages to get between the meetings. So you've got to kind of really, until you've been there 1 year, you don't really understand what's going on. But the main thing about Davos is that everyone's there. So if you're like in a normal working week, I might see 6 or 7 clients. In Davos, you can see 6 or 7 clients in a day. And it's like speed dating. Not that we've ever done that, but if you're speed dating, it's kind of like half an hour slots meeting clients. So you can see a lot of people, and then there'll be an event in the evening, maybe 2 events in the evening. And at those events, you'll see people you wouldn't normally get to see because they're wandering around. And you might even, and you'll see. I remember I stood behind John Kerry in a queue to go through the airport security thing. You kind of constantly spot people. You see major politicians. I spent an hour 1 year with David Cameron when we both got trapped because it was snowing. Theresa May. You kind of meet all these people because they're all there.
Yeah.
And there's not that many people there. So it's kind of high-octane meeting forum. There are loads of lectures going on major important events. We host a number of those. You don't really go to many of those. In fact, the guy I was talking to earlier said he's going to try and go this year because he's been for many years, Davos, he's never gone. And this year he's determined to go and see a few lectures, but it's quite hard to because your diary is constantly full of these meetings and you're constantly trying to make sure you've got enough time to do it. The other thing is it's incredibly icy. Right? Okay. So, because often it's a ski resort, so it's snowed. So you've got to have really good shoes. And that might sound a really stupid thing to do, but every year I've been there, I always see someone walking around with their arm in a sling or plaster or on crutches because they've fallen over on the first day, but they're determined not to miss out on Davos because they're there. And they're walking around looking quite silly with their arm in plaster. And you can see how, because I walked down from this hotel in the morning in quite thick ski boots. And I must admit, I've nearly fallen many times. So, because it's freezing cold first thing in the morning, it's -10 and it's solid ice. But as I say, it's a weird thing to do. It's really hard to describe, and hopefully I did some justice there. But the most important thing is that one reason why we're there and we invest in it is that our clients are there. And it's a great opportunity to see our clients. And often, I'm there with Bob Moritz and Tim Ryan and Raymond Chow and Petra Justovich. And as a result, you can often see clients, a global client with 3 people from the NLT at the same time. It's really hard to arrange normally.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're going to kind of move on just for time's sake. And I'm going to go to a question about legacy because we touched on it a bit earlier. I wanted to ask you how concerned you are with your legacy and what you want your legacy to be.
It might be on my mind, yeah. It's on my mind. I think other people have to decide what your legacy is, and they probably won't decide for years to come. And as I said, when you're 175 years old, we're past the baton many times. So the partners will do a secret ballot. They will decide on who the next territory or alliance senior partner will be. My job is to make sure that, if you like, over the time I've been here, like everybody in any role, you've given lots of people the opportunity to shine and be seen and have the experience so that the corporate history and skills of the firm are not just in the hands of my successor, but in people around them that can support them in taking the firm forward, because it's never about one person, it's about the whole board. And generally, if I look at the last 2 big changeovers, to when Kieran passed over the mantle to Ian or Ian passed over to me, probably half the board were new and half the board were from the previous board. So you get the new energy and ideas, but you retain the corporate history because it's quite a complicated business, 26,000 people, $7 billion turnover. So you do need that kind of combination. And then we've got to hope people think afterwards, everything we did wasn't about the time that I was there. It was always about building out into the future.
Sure. To end on a question which you just touched on, is the firm is coming up to its 175th anniversary. How does a firm stay relevant through such a long period of time when society and the economy, everything has undergone such rapid change? What is the key to that success?
I think it's all the things we've been talking about. It's a combination of being able to recruit for the world we're in, not the world we were in. and that's the diversity inclusion, that's the different skill sets. And then at the same time, it's to make sure that we're profitable enough that we can both retain the talent, invest in future talent, and invest in future technology that ensures that people don't get FOBO.
Understood.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, Kevin, for having us. And yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for your time. Great to speak to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.